Most American cities have a Chinatown, like this one in Washington, D.C. But until 1943, most Chinese were barred from becoming citizens of this country, even entering it. And now, a Chinese American woman is a member of Congress. Hello, this is Faiz Rahman, and you're watching Cafe DC. Congresswoman, thank you very much for your time. What an amazing political journey, from a teacher of psychology in Los Angeles to a member of Congress. And in a few years, actually, it didn't take you too long to become a congresswoman after you were a mayor in a local town in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area.
Well, it actually took 28 years, so it was a long journey.
Comparatively speaking. I mean, time is always relative.
Yes.
So tell us, about your experience. Why did you think about running for Congress? How it came about?
This seat opened up when President Obama made this amazing announcement selecting Hilda Solis as his Secretary of Labor. I didn't expect it to open. It was very sudden, but once I realized it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I said that I just had to run for the seat, and it was a very, very tough race, but I did win. And on July 14, 2009, victory was announced, but what was even more amazing was the next day when President Obama called me from the White House to congratulate me on becoming the first Chinese-American woman elected to Congress in history.
Amazing. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. I mean, you're the first Chinese-American woman member of Congress. So what do you feel about that? I mean, being such a kind of, representing a pivotal moment in the history of this country.
It was truly an amazing moment to be there on the floor of Congress, getting sworn in front of the 435 members of Congress. And in fact, at that moment, I reflected upon the fact that my grandfather had come here over the turn of the century and had faced many of the hostile laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act and the laws in California that prevented Asians from owning land. And yet he made something of his life anyway, opening up a small Chinese restaurant. But here, 2 generations later, I can be sworn into Congress.
And you basically passed this resolution. You sponsored that resolution to offer regrets on that law, which was passed like in 1843 first time, and then 1872, and then repealed in 1943.
Yes. It was in 1882 that the Chinese were made the scapegoats of America. They were here building the railroads and working in the mines, and the mainstream Americans saw them as the source of all their economic troubles. So they passed this draconian law. It was actually one of the most discriminatory laws in American history, severely curtailing immigration, but also saying that they could not become naturalized citizens so that they could not vote. And they and only they had to carry papers on them at all times or else be deported. This went on for 60 long years until 1943 when the law was repealed. But there had never been any kind of apology, even though this negatively affected Chinese Americans for generations. So we embarked upon this effort to make sure that there was some kind of apology. And so last year, yes, there was this bill expressing regret for what happened in 1882.
Thank you for sharing this history with us. So, I mean, a lot of people complain today, and it sounds like, it's a deja vu actually for a lot of people. But those who came here recently, they complain about, having a tough time on immigration and sometimes discrimination. So it's a lesson right here that, every wave of immigrants has faced this kind of behavior or treatment, but they moved on and finally became so successful, and you're a manifestation of that phenomenon. So this is like, for our audiences overseas, especially Muslim Americans here who are, right now they think, quote unquote, that they're being targeted for some unfair treatment. And you are from the Los Angeles area, where there's a big Muslim and Pakistani population.
Oh, yes.
And you do interact with them. So can you please enlighten us on your interaction with the Pakistani American community in the Southern California area?
Well, there is a very large Muslim American population in Southern California. And I have been very involved in the effort to fight hate crimes against Muslim Americans. When I was in the California State Assembly, I was chair of the Select Committee on Hate Crimes, and it happened to be the same year when 9/11 happened. We know that in California there was an increase of 346% in hate crimes, particularly those against Muslim Americans and Arab Americans. So I had many, many hearings all across California, passed laws to help protect hate crime victims. But when I came to Congress, I wanted to continue in that effort. And so now I'm on the Judiciary Committee in the House. I'm also chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. And in both these committees, I have made it my goal to stop the racial profiling that is occurring right now.
Congresswoman Judy Chu has been very vocal against profiling of people at public places, especially airports and railway stations. TSA, that is the Transportation Security Agency, disputes these allegations. And you're also on Homeland Security Committee, I mean, in your previous stint, in 2012 Congress, right? So, and most Muslim Americans, they face lots of discrimination, basically, you know, by the law enforcement agencies.
Yes.
And there were some cases brought to the courts. So what was your way of kind of, you know, communicating with these people that, yes, this is part of the process, or on both sides, I mean, to the community and also law enforcement? What kind of impact did you have on that process?
Well, the first issue has to do with airport security. Of course, we know that Muslim Americans and Arab Americans are very much targeted by TSA, but that the policies that they use as people are going through the airports are not always based in fact or very productive or even have any grounds. So we have met with John Pistole, the head of TSA, and we questioned him on these policies. We also questioned TSA publicly at the hearings in the Judiciary Committee about racial profiling. I mean, there's not supposed to be racial profiling. TSA actually says that they're not supposed to be using that as a means by which to stop people, but it is still going on. And we also found out that the complaints go down a black hole. They haven't been answered in any kind of systematic way. So we have been working on changing that system. We do get lots of feedback from the Muslim American community, and that will be an ongoing issue. On law enforcement, we've also had hearings in the Judiciary Committee, and in fact, we have oversight over the Department of Justice. So I've had Eric Holder in front of me, and I have asked him questions each and every time on what's going on with Muslim Americans. For instance, the terrible stereotypes that were in the FBI training manuals, saying such things as facial hair is an indication of extremism amongst Muslim Americans. I mean, these are serious things that are actually written in the FBI manuals. And so I asked him about that and pressed him on it. And then finally he said that those manuals have had those parts of it taken out, and those people responsible for it are no longer with the department. But also there have been issues of racial profiling in terms of spying, such as the NYPD spying on the Muslim American community in New York, when it shouldn't be their purview. I mean, this is not for the NYPD to do and oversteps their bounds. So we have pressed Eric Holder on that as well, and we have put together a gathering of Congress members to protest these actions and to ask for accountability from the Department of Justice on this.
What you just said, Congresswoman, is basically signifies the importance of participation in the political process. For the recent immigrant communities especially, I mean, because they're the focus. But there's some reluctance still, in some communities to come forward and participate in the process. What do you say to that? I mean, when you go around and meet with people, how do you convince them, no, it's in their interest to get involved and make a difference?
It is so important to speak up about these things and to speak up about actions, if there were discriminatory actions, and of course it's so important to report it. But most importantly, people need to organize. People need to be in groups so that they can take some sort of action. I always talk about what happened to Japanese Americans. Japanese Americans lost everything that they had during World War II because of accusations of espionage amongst them. And when that happened, then Congress and the president took them off to these these internment camps all around the country, where their lives were disrupted and the guns were pointed in at them. And in the end, not a single case of espionage was proven. So you have to ask, why is it that people did not change this? Why was this action taken without protest? And the answer is that there were not enough people speaking up on their behalf. That's why the coalitions have to be created.
And now there are Japanese Americans in federal cabinet, in Congress, in the Senate, so everywhere. So this is the result of their participation in the political process and
that is
making a difference.
That is right, but also Japanese Americans have learned a lot from what happened to them during World War II. And they decided that they were going to participate, but also that they were going to get an apology for what happened to them during the camp internment, and they even got reparations. So they got deeply involved in the political process and finally got justice for what happened. But they also joined in other efforts to stop this from happening to other people, and that's why many of them are the first to say that these acts of racial profiling should not happen to Muslim Americans.
You come from an immigrant community and you have worked on immigration issues. There are over 12 million undocumented immigrants here in this country, and they're waiting for some kinds of reforms so that they can go on with their lives. And among them are Mexicans, Pakistanis, Indians, Chinese, people from all over the world. Is there any hope that this bill or these reforms will ever go through?
I feel very, very hopeful. There is a bipartisan group of 8 senators that have been putting a bill together. There also is a bipartisan group of House members that are putting a bill together. We see more movement now than we've had in the past 2 decades. And the reason for it is that in this past presidential election, President Obama got 73% of the Asian vote and 71% of the Hispanic vote. That was a really strong vote, and it said that people are concerned about immigration reform, and they want it to happen. They want it to happen now. So that's why there's all this movement.
Congresswoman, you're from California. California is about almost 3,000 miles away from Washington, very distant place. California is a heavily Democratic state, and their governor was, I think you had to deal with Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor?
Yes.
Probably? Okay. A staunch Republican, or probably a moderate Republican.
Yeah.
But how you were able to work with a Republican governor and getting things done? And then when you came here in Washington, you saw all this gridlock, a Democratic president, and then this Republican Congress, and so much gridlock, so much friction, clashes. How do you compare? Was California better than what's happening in Washington?
Well, it was tough in that situation in California, and there were many roadblocks, I would have to say. However, there are some situations where you can come to agreement. And in Congress, even though people see the polarization on the budget issues, fiscal cliff and the debt ceiling and all, there are times when there is agreement. For instance, on transportation issues on a local level, there is a lot of agreement, and in fact, we've been able to make some headway on on some key issues like making freight part of the national infrastructure.
The big ticketed items, so to speak, they get more publicity. Yeah, I mean, the president just proposed a budget for 2014, and there are some, items that become, talk of the town. Defense cuts, and there are some cuts in the international broadcasting as well. Yeah. So I'm not sure you have read the whole document. You haven't probably. But what do you think? I mean, how the Congress is going to take all those cuts in addition to the sequestrations? What you're hearing among your colleagues? Are they going to act upon this finally? Are we going to have a budget after 4 years, or it's just going to be another CR?
I don't know what will happen. I do think that the president's budget is kind of a starting point for some sort of discussion. I think he was trying to look like he was making some compromises so that he could at least have a dialogue with the Republicans. If that works, then great. But I do think that such cuts would not be acceptable to Democrats unless there's some form of revenue. And revenue in common sense ways, such as in taking away the subsidies to oil at a time when the oil industry has record profits. So why are we having those kinds of things in the budget? There are simple things that we could do to bring in more dollars.
There are some parallels from California that you can lean on when you make decisions or discuss these issues, budget issues in Congress. Is there something that, why California was able to reduce their budget? Actually, now they're in surplus, right? Mm-hmm. So that's amazing, because what we are hearing that California was going to go the Greek way, basically. They were just going to be another Greece. But lo and behold, they not only just reduced the budget, now they're in surplus. How did they accomplish this? And can't you just get some tips from them, Governor Jerry Brown, for that matter?
The difference there was having a Democratic governor who was willing to take on this proposition that turned everything around. He got the initiative on the ballot, and the California people voted for it, which was really major. I mean, the California people voted to tax themselves. So that was a major accomplishment, and that turned everything around for California. But whether such a process can happen across the United States is a totally different story.
Congressman, you're from the Los Angeles area, famous for some good food, especially some Chinese food. I've been to some of those restaurants. We were just talking about some Chinese halal restaurants. Mm-hmm. Talk about something about your experience in Los Angeles, being mayor of a small town near Los Angeles, Monterey Park. What did you accomplish as a mayor? What were the issues that really impacted your life and your decisions?
Well, I actually never thought that I would be in elected office. I was teaching at the time, and I thought that I would end up teaching psychology in the community college for a long time. But then this horrible situation happened in Monterey Park, the city that I was living in, which was an anti-immigrant English-only movement. What happened was that there were residents who'd been living there for a long time, and then immigrants started moving in, and they changed the nature of the city. They started opening up businesses.
And mostly they were like Chinese Americans.
That's
or
right.
Chinese in Monterey Park area. Okay.
So there was a movement of a certain group of residents against them, and they wanted only English on the signs in the city, only English books in the library, and for English to be the only language spoken publicly in the city. And the last straw was indeed when they put something like that in as a resolution into the city council, this English-only language bill. And when they got it passed, there was an immediate reaction against them because it was so intolerant. And so I joined that movement, and we got thousands of signatures on petitions. The pressure was enough to have one city council member overturn his vote and thus overturn the resolution. But out of that, it became so very apparent that the representation on the city council did not reflect the city. So I ran for city council, and I won. And I made it my goal to bring together the city. In fact, I did a whole series of activities to bring about greater dialogue and an appreciation of diversity. And then I became the mayor, and everything turned around in the city.
Oh, just I mean, an excellent example of participating in the political process and making a difference. You have a doctorate, a PhD in psychology, and you taught psychology for almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. Did you miss teaching psychology or just teaching?
Teaching is great. I was able to meet so many students and to, most importantly, hear about their lives. I had students from all walks of life that came from all around the world, that came from all kinds of circumstances. Many came from low-income families, and many were the first in their family to go to college. So it was very inspirational to be able to meet them and to see them trying to change their lives around.
Some of those lessons come in handy in Congress as well? Some of those psychological lessons or lessons on psychology?
The lessons of psychology, of course, are very, very helpful in Congress. I always talk...
Are you gauging me too at this point as a psychologist?
I'm gauging that you are very eager and enthusiastic and a great interviewer.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. That's a great compliment. Absolutely. Good. I think that's what I was looking for. And you said it. And a great laugh with a great laughter. So good. Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, let's talk about gun control. Big issue. President is big on this issue. Even you have had some help from the Republican Party. Where's it going?
I believe that we are making some movement. There is a very common sense bill that is being put forth, which is to have background checks on everybody, regardless of whether they buy a gun at a store or at a gun show or privately. And so that would make a huge difference in what's going on with regard to the violence in America. This is a bill that I think deserves to go forth in the process and to be signed into law. Now, surprisingly, there are those that are so pro-gun that they are resistant to even this. It took all those families from Sandy Hook to come to the Capitol and to tell their truly heart-wrenching stories in order for there to be some movement. But apparently it has worked, and there has been some movement.
You live in California. You, unlike a congressman from Virginia or Maryland, you need to travel like 3,000 miles again to California to be home and to be with their family. How do you balance this life? Politics, home, family?
Well, I have sort of gotten used to the schedule, but I must say that it is it's really something to try to travel home every weekend with a 5-mile flight each way and also a 3-hour time difference.
So does your husband cook most of the times for you, who is also a politician in California, or you get to cook sometime?
Well, we're always on the run. So we kind of...
So take home Chinese food?
Yes, and that's what makes it so convenient to live in Monterey Park, I must say.
Yes,
it is the land of the of fast and easily accessible food.
I've been to one of those restaurants, halal Chinese restaurants, and I think you've been there too.
I've been there, yeah.
in Rosemead. Great food. What's your favorite food?
I like all kinds of foods. Actually, I like diversity in foods. I love trying different things. So I'm just happy that we actually have some of the best restaurants around in Monterey Park and in the San Gabriel Valley. And in fact, they're world-renowned.
That was the first Chinese-American Congresswoman Judy Chu. Please don't forget to send your comments and feedback to cd@voanews.com. This is your host, Faiz Rahman, and thank you for watching.